kids, it's Pastor Brian again. We've been reading through this book called The Promise of Life, a big story about God's law. It's a fantastic book, and we're in part 3. Part 3 is called The Loss of Life. There are 2 scripture references I'll read to you. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin." John 8:34. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me and through it killed me. Romans chapter 7, verses 8 through 11. All right, part 3, the loss of life. After Moses had read the book of law to Israel, all Israel agreed to obey all of God's law. So Moses went back up the mountain to talk with God again. But while Moses was on the mountain, Israel quickly forgot about God's good laws. They built for themselves an idol, a golden calf, and began worshiping it. They even said that it was the God that had just led them out of Egypt. Moses had just taught Israel all of God's laws, including the law which says, "Do not make idols." And Israel had just agreed to obey them all. These were easy laws and good laws. These were laws that promised life to Israel. Why did Israel disobey these laws? Israel had a serious problem. Even though they were no longer slaves in Egypt, they were still slaves to another master. They were slaves to sin. Do you see their hearts? What's wrapped around their hearts is a snake. A snake is wrapped around their hearts. Where's the last time we saw a snake? With Adam and Eve. He lied to Adam and Eve, and death entered the world because of Satan, the serpent. And just like Egypt, sin would kill Israel. When Israel heard God's laws that promised life, sin came alive and inside of them and lied to them. God's law said, "Do not make idols." But sin lied and said, "You will not die if you make idols." Because they were slaves to sin, Israel foolishly believed the lie and made an idol. Because they were slaves to sin, Israel disobeyed God's law that promised life. Israel had been set free from slavery in Egypt, but they still needed to be set free from their slavery to sin before they could have life. Because Israel disobeyed God's law that promised life, they were punished with death. God sent a destroying plague to Israel, and thousands of them died. God's law promised life, but because of sin, God's law brought death. Even though Israel had disobeyed God's law, God kept his great promise to Abraham and brought Israel into their new land, a place full of life. In this new land, God even lived with Israel at the temple. However, in this new land, Israel was still a slave to sin. So Israel kept disobeying God's law for many years. Because they kept disobeying God's law, Israel and her land were cursed with death instead of being blessed with life. All of these good things in the land, fruit and food and rejoicing, but then because of sin, you see a man stealing money, people fighting and arguing, and a man chasing another man who's stolen stuff from him. God was patient and slow to anger with Israel. He disciplined Israel and called them to come back to him, to obey his laws and have life. But God's patience with disobedient Israel finally came to an end. Because they kept disobeying his law, God brought the worst curse of the law upon Israel. Israel was punished with death outside their land and away from God. That sounds just like Adam and Eve. God left his temple and it was destroyed. Enemies came and captured Israel's land. Many Israelites were killed and others were taken away as slaves. God's law promised life with God, but because of sin, God's law brought death away from God. And that's it for part 3. Part 4 is the witness to life. Can't wait to read it to you.